In 1989, a quiet Midwestern town received a report it was never supposed to see. The document was stamped confidential. It listed groundwater test results from beneath a local factory. Benzene, vinyl chloride, trichloroethylene, levels far above what federal regulators considered safe. The town council met behind closed doors. The report was sealed, and for nearly 3 decades the people drinking that water were never told. But someone knew, and eventually someone talked. The town of Riverton, population just under 14,000, sat between 2 rivers and endless stretches of farmland. It had 1 stoplight, 2 churches that anchored opposite ends of Main Street, and a water tower that rose like a steel guardian above the skyline. For generations, Riverton's identity was tied to one employer, Midstate Chemicals. The plant opened in the late 1950s during America's manufacturing boom. It produced industrial solvents used in everything from car parts to household cleaners. By the 1980s, nearly a third of Riverton's households had at least one family member employed there. It paid well. It sponsored Little League teams. It funded the 4th of July fireworks, and it sat just a mile upstream from the town's municipal wells. Back then, no one thought much about it. The river flowed, the jobs stayed steady, the water tasted fine. But by the early 1980s, something began to change. Doctors at Riverton General Hospital started noticing patterns, not dramatic, not sudden, just unusual. A cluster of rare liver disorders, several cases of a blood cancer rarely seen in small towns, a handful of birth defects that didn't fit statistical norms. Individually, each case could be explained. Together, they raised a quiet question no one wanted to ask. Was this coincidence? The first person to push publicly was not a politician or a journalist. It was a schoolteacher named Margaret Hale. In 1984, her husband, a maintenance supervisor at Midstate, was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia. He was 42. Margaret began talking to other families in hospital waiting rooms. She kept a notebook, names, diagnoses, addresses. Within months, she had filled half the pages. Most of the families lived within a 2-mile radius of the municipal wells. Margaret attended a town council meeting and asked a simple question: "Has anyone tested the water?" The council assured her the water met all state standards. Tests were conducted annually. Everything was compliant. But compliance is not the same as safety. And in 1986, a routine inspection by the State Environmental Agency uncovered something troubling. Buried chemical drums behind the Midstate facility, some of them corroding. The company claimed they were relics from the 1960s, safely contained. No risk to groundwater. Air. The state issued a minor citation. No further action. But behind the scenes, regulators ordered expanded groundwater sampling. That was when the confidential report was created. And that was when the town leadership chose silence. The report, finalized in 1989, found volatile organic compounds migrating toward the municipal wells. Not immediately dangerous, the summary concluded, but trending upward. The town council faced a choice: publicly disclose uncertain data and risk economic collapse, or wait for more clarity. Midstate employed over 1,200 people. Property values depended on it. So did tax revenue. According to later testimony, company representatives met privately with town officials shortly after the report surfaced. They argued the findings were preliminary, inconclusive. Releasing them would cause panic. The council voted to classify the report as advisory. No public announcement followed. Over the next decade, Riverton's illness rates continued to rise, slowly, almost invisibly. By the late 1990s, local doctors began quietly comparing notes again. This time, they contacted a regional epidemiologist at a nearby university. The epidemiologist requested historical cancer data from the state. The numbers showed something statistically uncomfortable. Riverton's rate of certain cancers was nearly double the state average. Still, correlation was not proof. Then came the whistleblower. In 2001, a former mid-state engineer named Daniel Kessler filed a complaint with the Environmental Protection Agency. He alleged that from the 1970s through the mid-1980s, liquid waste solvents had been routinely dumped into unlined pits behind the facility. He claimed internal memos warned that the pits could leach into groundwater within decades. Those memos were never shared with regulators. The EPA launched a preliminary inquiry. Mid-state denied wrongdoing. The town leadership insisted the water remained within federal safety limits. But then a local reporter obtained a copy of the sealed 1989 report through a public records request. The headline ran across the front page: "Town officials knew of contamination risk since 1989." Everything changed. The revelation split Riverton in half. Some residents felt betrayed. Others feared losing the plant more than they feared chemicals. Protests formed outside City Hall. So did counter-protests supporting Mid-State. The company hired environmental consultants who argued the contaminants likely came from multiple sources: old farms, dry cleaners, even natural mineral deposits. Meanwhile, independent tests commissioned by a group of residents found measurable levels of benzene in private wells just outside town limits. The EPA escalated its investigation. Subpoenas were issued. Internal Mid-State documents surfaced showing that executives had discussed the cost of installing proper hazardous waste liners in 1978 and opted against it to preserve quarterly earnings. But proving direct causation between the chemicals and specific illnesses proved difficult. The legal fight stretched for years. A class action lawsuit was filed in 2004 on behalf of over 300 families. Mid-State argued that the town's own water management practices contributed to contamination spread. The town argued it had relied on the company's environmental assurances. Blame shifted in circles, and then came the turning point. In 2008, during discovery proceedings, attorneys uncovered a second, lesser-known report from 1993. Unlike the 1989 advisory, this one included modeling projections. It predicted that without intervention, contaminant plumes would intersect the town's primary well field by 2005. The report had been commissioned jointly by Mid-State and the town. It was never presented at a public meeting. One council member who had served in the early 1990s testified that he remembered discussions about potential long-term risk, but did not recall seeing that specific projection. The document was signed. The signature line bore both the company's environmental director and the town's water superintendent. The revelation shifted the narrative. This was no longer about uncertainty. It was about informed silence. Settlement talks began quietly. In 2010, Mid-State agreed to a confidential financial settlement estimated at over $70 million. The town established a medical monitoring fund for residents. No admission of liability was included. The plant reduced operations the following year and eventually closed. But the story didn't end there. The Riverton case reverberated beyond one town. Legal scholars began citing it in debates about environmental liability and corporate disclosure obligations. The case helped influence revisions to how contaminated sites were reported under federal law. It contributed momentum to stricter groundwater monitoring requirements and expanded public access to environmental testing data. Perhaps more significantly, it reshaped the legal interpretation of failure to warn. Courts began examining not just whether contamination occurred, but whether credible projections of future harm had been withheld. For Riverton, the damage was harder to quantify. Property values fell after the plant closed. Some families moved away. Others stayed, unwilling to abandon generational homes. Cleanup efforts continued for years. Soil was excavated. Groundwater pumps installed. In 2018, state officials declared the municipal water supply compliant and stable. Yet distrust lingered, because even if the water was clean now, the past could not be filtered out. Today, the Riverton water tower still stands over the town. It has been repainted twice since the scandal broke, the rust removed, the steel reinforced. From a distance, it looks ordinary, but for many residents, it represents something else, not just contamination, compromise. A moment when leaders calculated risk and chose quiet over warning. The illnesses cannot be undone. The decades cannot be replayed. And perhaps the most unsettling part is not that chemicals entered the groundwater. It is that projections were made, reports were written, meetings were held, and for 30 years the people drinking that water were never told what their leaders already knew. In small towns across America, water towers rise above skylines just like Riverton's, solid, reliable, trusted. The question Riverton leaves behind is simple and uncomfortable. When the next confidential report is written somewhere else, who will decide whether the public deserves to know?